So, now moving on, we start once again going to the coal face and talking about our technicians and the world in which they operate. And I'm delighted to welcome today Steve Nash, the Chief Executive Officer of the Institute of the Motor Industry, who's going to be talking to us about technician licensing. Steve.
Thank you, Stefan. You quite often hear these days people saying that we're at a point where we're about to see, or we're seeing, the most changes in our industry that any of us have seen in our lifetime, probably for 100 years, going back to sort of post-First World War time. And I just want to put that in perspective a little bit, so let's just show a little film. Now, it must be obvious to everybody now that the trend towards electrification is an inexorable one. Every successive motor show, I mean, the Paris Motor Show has just happened. Manufacturers are falling over themselves with the sort of the diesel in sharp decline. Every manufacturer is falling over themselves. I read only today that Honda and General Motors have just gone into a major collaboration around. In fact, that's around autonomous cars. But the whole world in which we operate is changing, and it must be obvious when you listen to what we heard earlier on from Hella and some of the other presentations we've had today, that the days of the gifted amateur are over. Or at least if they're not over, they will be. I mean, look, we've got 32 million cars on the road, as Quentin said, and it takes about 15 years for that population to turn over. But the rate at which these new technologies are entering the marketplace is phenomenal. And that's where recognising the danger is really what it's all about, because the electric vehicle systems, which is the primary thing I'm talking about here, most electric vehicles, whether they're plug-in hybrids or whether they're fully electric vehicles, on average they're operating between 400 and 800 volts. If it's commercial vehicles, ZF had a full commercial vehicle drivetrain at the Automechanica, which operates at nearly 1200 volts. This is direct current, by the way, so not alternating current, so I mean, it doesn't throw you off. You remain there until you turn into a sticky mess. So this is not something to be taken lightly, and you can't expect somebody who's been working on internal combustion engines all their life to automatically understand that just because it looks like a car. because under the bonnet it's entirely different. I think somebody, a trainer actually said to me, and I think this is a very good way of putting it, when you lift the bonnet on an internal combustion engine car, be it diesel or petrol, you know, there's noise, there's heat, there's things moving. You open up the bonnet on an electric car, it's a completely inert thing. You know, whether it's on or whether it's off, there's nothing happening. And you've no idea which of those systems, even when you know, take the power down, you've no idea which of those systems still carry dangerous currents. And so it's absolutely obvious that it's not possible for people to work on these things without being properly trained. And the interesting thing is, at the moment, there are around about 250,000 people that we, and that, when I say we, I'm talking about ourselves, the many trade bodies in the industry. There are 48 trade bodies actually in the automotive industry, believe it or not, which underlines what a complex industry it is. But collectively, we know of about 250,000 people who work on cars for a living. There's probably about another 20 or 30,000 out there that none of us know about because they don't belong to any of our organisations. You know, there's nothing stopping anybody, is there, deciding tomorrow that they're going to service and repair cars for a living. There's no requirement out there. And as Andy very eloquently put it, you know, actually most people shop on price and location. They don't ask whether the person working on their car is skilled. In fact, the interesting thing is that we did a survey of MPs, and most of them, these are sitting MPs in the House, most of them thought that a licence already existed. They didn't remember when they passed that particular piece of regulation, but they thought it already existed. And when you actually ask them where they get their own car serviced, and do they know what the qualifications are of the person who services their car, they haven't got a clue. Nobody has. Nobody asks. But we're in a situation now where, I mean, right now, of all those technicians that we know about 1% of them have had electric vehicle training. It's very largely in the franchise sector because the motor manufacturers are obviously going to make sure their dealers can handle the products that they're going to give them. It's not entirely, I mean, there are notably some independent operators that have started to train their people. And I know it's difficult because for a lot of people they're going to say, well, I'm not seeing these things at the moment, so you know, why am I going to train people? But you know, what do you do when that does happen? I love that description earlier on. I thought it was a really good description about campaigning for change with government is like stirring porridge with a straw. I always say it's like pushing water uphill with a fork, but it's kind of, whichever way you look at it, it's extremely difficult, particularly with this government, because this government declare themselves to be an anti-regulation government. So they want things to happen, but they don't particularly want to take the responsibility for making sure that happens. It's not necessarily, you know, they don't necessarily walk the talk a lot of the time, but nevertheless it's a great way of holding you at bay when you go to talk to them about regulation. And it takes a lot of convincing, and this is one of those things, and you'll know this yourselves. Stefan will know it, and those of you who are responsible for other bodies. You can't give up. You really do have to be persistent. And we've been pushing at this now for about 2 or 3 years. And it's amazing how you start to drip feed the consciousness into their consciousness, because we've had questions raised in the House by MPs we've never even spoken to. And we've given evidence to a couple of bills that have gone through the House, most notably the Autonomous and Electric Vehicles Bill, which an MP we've never spoken to put our motion forward as an amendment to the bill. I have to say it was one of 64 amendments that went through, none of which got accepted, on the basis that the government only really wanted that bill to sort out how you insure an autonomous car and do something about the charging network. But nevertheless, we're in very productive dialogue with Chris Grayling's department and with OLEV, the Office for Low Emission Vehicles, who work on their behalf. But rather than sit on our hands and wait for the government, because I mean it's pretty obvious they've got 1 or 2 other things on their plate at the moment, and the last thing they need is to be putting another piece of legislation through the House when they've got other things to be worrying about. What we have achieved though is a commitment from the government in their Road to Zero strategy. I guess you can read those words, but they basically committed to work with us to to ensure that we get the appropriate skills in the sector that are needed to work safely on electric cars. Now, this is very much a health and safety issue. It's about the safe. It's not about people riding in the cars. The cars are safe, and they've got all sorts of fail-safes if they crash and so on. But it is about the people who work on them. It's about the people who work for you. It's about the people who work in service and repairing cars everywhere. It's about the emergency services. It's about, anybody, the breakdown guys. It's about anybody who comes into contact with these vehicles. Actually, I mean, particularly important for the guys who turn up to accidents and so on. But I mean, this is real progress, because this enables us to hold the government's feet to the fire and say, well, you've made a commitment. What are you going to do about it? And actually, rather than wait for them to decide whether or not they had the appetite for legislation, I'm not a lawyer, but my daughter is. But I know I've done a little bit of legal training in the past, and I'm sure that a lot of you appreciate the way our legal system works, which is to kind of try and avoid people sneaking around the sides of a regulation, is that we have the actuality of the law. You can break the actuality of the law. You can act outside the specifics of a piece of regulation, but you can also be guilty of breaking the spirit of it. And very often they're written in such a way that because you can't think of every possible eventuality, they're written in such a way that if something falls within the spirit of a regulation, it still applies. And we've had a very high-level legal opinion that says the Electricity at Work Act actually applies to somebody working on electric vehicles, wherever that may be. You probably know that if you have any electrical work done at home or commercial and domestic applications, you have to use a licensed electrician now. You're supposed to get the work certified. You can have difficulty selling your house if you haven't got the proper certificates these days. And that's huge, actually. Having that legal opinion is huge, because it takes away the biggest barrier to moving licensing forward. And bear in mind, we're talking here specifically about people working on electric cars. We're not talking about general licensing here. There'd never be an appetite for that. That would be like boiling the ocean, trying to get the government to sort of consider that. This is just about working on high voltage systems of electric, or rather electrified vehicles. We also have the support of the Health and Safety Executive, who are the body who actually enforce that regulation. So we actually have a way forward, and we're in dialogue with the HSE and people from government right now about this. I think it's daft to think we don't work with regulation. We now have MOT qualifications where we didn't have them a couple of years ago. We have a de facto regulation within the body repair side, because the Thatcham insurance standards, backed by a British standard, are very broadly applied. Not 100%, but they're there. You have your Tyre safe, which is brilliant, fantastic. So you already understand the notion of a card-carrying professional, and I think that's fantastic, because this is, in effect, what we're talking about. So where we are at the moment is a very strong position to carry this forward. So what does it look like? Well, let me just take you back a little bit, because about 15 years ago, our industry, the automotive industry, was about to have the big hammer of the Office of Fair Trading come down on its head. They were about to raise something called a super complaint, because they said that collectively the industry was responsible for a disproportionate number of complaints through trading standards and through consumer associations and so on. And they said to us, you need to get your act together. And there are two things we want to see. We want to see a unified garage code. That became motor codes, which the SMMT looked after. It's kind of moved on somewhat nowadays. I think they did their motor industry ombudsman thing instead. And they asked for a voluntary license to practice, which was called ATA at the time, and they asked us at the IMI to do that. Still out there. We call it IMI accreditation these days, but it's still out there. There's about 40,000 people on an ongoing basis who have active accreditations, which are renewable. But voluntary licensing in the end is really difficult, because because there's too many people out there who will never do. most people by choice wouldn't have got involved in the MOT qualifications, but if it's the business you're in, you have to do it. And we were quite heavily involved in that as well. I mean, we're one of the organisations that delivers those qualifications. And I know a lot of people, kind of held out against that, but actually in the end it's right. And what this is based on is something we have 15 years of experience on. So what you're licensed to do depends on what you intend to do. So having one level of license on its own isn't enough. In effect, I mean, we already have technician, diagnostic technician and master technician accreditations. And it's interesting actually, when we reflect back on that, for me that's one of the biggest achievements that ATA, as it was, brought about. Because prior to that, there were all sorts of people wandering around the industry saying, I'm a master technician. That might have meant a lot, it might have meant nothing at all. And in some cases, that was true. They just worked there a long time and they got that. Now there is only one common currency. And that has to be the case here. You can't have lots of different organisations deciding what an appropriate level of standard of safety is. If we can define with the HSE what is appropriate and agree that level, then it has to be a national standard. And it's based broadly on level 2, 3 and 4 competence. So you can kind of see that the first, I mean, there is a level below that. For people who are never going to go near the electrics, there's training and they're available to make, so they can just understand what they shouldn't do. And actually, everybody laughed a bit earlier on when we were told that some people thought that Part 1 tyres was a brand. That's people, isn't it? How dumb can they be? Well, I know of 2 cases in the States where people have killed themselves by pressure washing an electric car that happened to be on charge at the time. I know of a case in the UK where somebody brought in a hybrid vehicle, thought how difficult can it be, put it up on a 2-post lift, dropped the battery pack out the back, and the car dropped off the front of the lift. Yeah, it sounds really dumb, doesn't it? But why do we have legislation in the first place? Because people can be quite silly at times, And what this is about is professional standards. This is guys who are actually going to be coming into contact with this technology. So at level 2, you understand, the fundamental thing is understanding how to make the car safe, whatever you're doing on it. And all these cars have a kill switch on the high voltage electrics. They're all different though, of course, just like headlamp alignment, they're all a little bit different, and they have different processes. But undertaking routine maintenance, and that would include exhausts, batteries, the normal battery I'm talking about here. At the next level, you're talking about a higher level of competence. You're talking about system repair and replacement. And then, of course, at level 4, which is equivalent to master technician, you're actually getting right into the systems. Look, there are levels above that which are not practical for anybody in the commercial world to go to. The OEMs have guys at levels 5, 6 and above who can get right down into the battery packs and make kind of repairs at that level. But this is a workable thing. And I might add, because I should emphasise this point, this is an open market, this. I mean, yes, my organisation does provide qualifications and accreditations at that level, but so do other people. And this can't be an earning opportunity for the IMI. It's not, the government wouldn't wear that for 1 second, and neither would the industry. So this is an open competitive market. The bit that we will do, because that's what, we're not a trade body, we're a professional body, and this is the bit that the government would want us to do, because that's what they expect professional bodies to do, is the administration and the governance bit. And what that basically amounts to is, it's very similar to gas safe, it's very similar in fact to what electricians have to go through, is that having gained the appropriate standard, there are 2 ways to maintain it. That on a 3-year basis, you undertake continuous professional development, so you can evidence that and show that you can then be relicensed for the next period, or you can come for an assessment. I think most people would probably go the former route, but I think the only other thing I would say around this is that, as I said, this is all about the high voltage stuff. There is another thing we have to be aware of, though, and this is what we were hearing about earlier on. I think the government are also interested in how they can ensure the safety. This is about public safety rather than health and safety in the workshop. how we can ensure that only competent people work, and properly trained people and equipped work on ADAS, DAS and fully autonomous cars. By 2020 we'll have the first level 4 autonomous cars on the road. There are 5 levels. So level 5 is like the bloke in the film, you sit in the back seat while the car drives you. Level 4, it does that, but you still have to have some manual intervention. But if I tell you that it takes, for an A380 Airbus, which is the most sophisticated airliner out there at the moment, for that aircraft to fly itself across the Atlantic, takes 2.5 terabytes of data. And for those who don't know, a terabyte is 1,000 gigabytes. So quite a lot of numbers. For a passenger car to drive itself up a high street, takes 45 terabytes of data. Now, you wouldn't get on an Airbus that had been serviced by somebody who wasn't properly qualified, would you? Will you get in an autonomous car, or even a semi-autonomous car, that hasn't been worked on and set up by somebody who's capable of signing that work off? I think not. So I've rest my case.